Hello, everyone. Today we have Leslie Garrett, my neighbor. And it's funny, the only time we really see each other is now doing this. So that's funny. We're both very busy. Leslie is working at Cleveland Heights University Heights and has been there for 24 years as an educator and now also a learning coach, the IB coordinator, International Baccalaureate, for those that do not know, and also works with RESA with two teachers there, helping them get on the right foot moving forward at Cleveland Heights. And welcome to the show, Leslie.
Morning.
Good morning. Yeah, it's always great catching up with a neighbor that, we live 30 feet apart and we never see each other. So it's nice seeing
Right.
you.
Away from the driveway.
Exactly. That's all we get. So I always start off with, give us a little bit of your background at how you got where you're at, your school and what you did in the classroom prior to all this, because 24 years, it took me by surprise because I just picture you as a vibrant person that still has that young energy and ready to go, and you've been in there for 24 years now. So tell me a little bit about your pathway.
Well, thank you. Young and vibrant. I try. I try. um, I've been in the Cleveland Heights School District for 24 years. I started here straight out of college, which was a little bit of I'm going to say culture shock for me because I grew up in Mentor my whole life going to Catholic schools. So really being in the classroom in 2001 for the first time in Heights was my first real public school experience other than some student teaching in Euclid and Mayfield. So that part was it was a challenge because school looked a little different in the public school than what I was used to. I went to John Carroll for my undergrad, so even Jesuit school there. So a lot of differences there. But the one thing I can say about starting my career in Heights and still being here 24 years later is that it really is a teaching community. So I got hired in November. I didn't even start the school year that year.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's hard.
Um,
What were you teaching? What did you get hired to do?
So I started out subbing. I graduated in May, normal timeline with college and just didn't get hired right out of college. So I started subbing and then I went for an interview at Noble Elementary School. And I'm going to admit this on air is like, I didn't get hired for the first job I interviewed for. It was a second grade position. And then a few weeks later, I get a phone call again and it's the principal from Noble. And she's like, hi, you're on our list. We'd like to interview for fourth grade position. And I thought it was weird. And I went and she didn't remember me, but that was a reflection of me. And I'm like, okay, like what went wrong that first time that I didn't stand out in an interview?
Hmm.
So not getting the job the first time, having a few weeks to really reflect on that, and then going back in and working to sell myself um, was the shift I needed to make. And then I did get hired. The teacher that was in that room resigned. They had had 5 long-term subs at that point. Um, so it was crazy. It was
Yes.
really crazy. But I had a strong, solid team from general ed to special ed that really just took me under their wings. And I still work with one of the teachers here,
That's
24
great.
years later in one of my buildings.
That's great.
So
It's hard to walk into a fourth grade position in November, especially
yeah,
if they're not used to any one teacher.
yeah.
That's crazy.
And rewind 24 years, all of the state testing was in fourth grade. We had reading, math, science, and social studies tests. Back that was when we had the proficiency test. So all of that was in fourth grade. So not only to walk into a classroom as a first day teacher in November after all of this, and then have to prepare for some of those, not some, all of those assessments coming their way. So
Well, it does speak highly of the team to help out. It's great to get into that kind of situation where you have colleagues that are willing to help and are capable of helping. Because
absolutely.
sometimes you get people that are willing, but you may not want their help. So that was good to hear that you have that whole base
Yeah. And I've
behind
been
you.
on teams with unwilling too. So
Mhm.
yeah, yeah,
That's actually my topic this week when I'm teaching at Kent is how do you work with people that don't want to work?
yeah.
It's a good topic. So I'm gonna actually pause your story because I have a question about
Sure.
the interview process because if you did not make that impact that you wanted to make the first time, what did you change to come back in that second interview to sell yourself better?
I think in the first interview, now, mind you, this was 24 years ago, I really just focused on answering questions and rather than really talking through them. So when they asked about instructional strategies or formative assessment or whatever the question was based on, I just gave them the answer. And I learned that I needed to elaborate. So we can all throw out something about an instructional practice, but what does that look like? How was that data used and how do you move forward? So really taking it through the whole process, giving specific examples. And I remember in that interview, we were talking about some sort of writing. And I said, well, you could pull up a current event through a newspaper article. And the teacher sitting in on the interview did not like my answer. And so then being in that position where you still have to, like, you can tell by body language somebody doesn't like your answer, but you still have to really just stick to who you are and work through that. That was tough. But I think that having to do 2 interviews probably was better for me because I knew then that the process wasn't what I expected. So I can wholeheartedly say I probably wasn't prepared for the first one. So that's something you can take to heart in your role then too.
Exactly. And I also think that being the people that we are because we like helping others and giving credit to where credit's due, we don't talk about ourselves well enough. And I think that's hard in that first interview to sell yourself without sounding cocky or, like a know-it-all. So I think
Yeah.
that we hold back a little bit, like I don't want to be that person, you know.
Yeah. That actually kept me from this role the first time I interviewed for it too. And my principal pulled me aside afterwards and said, no, it's I. And that was really hard for me, especially I think because my first 12 years was so collaborative with the team I ended up with that it was we, but they're not interviewing a team in those situations. They're interviewing you. And that was a challenge.
So were you on that fourth grade team for 12 years then?
I taught 4th grade for 12 years. That was self-contained. So I taught all the subject areas and I loved it. Just the relational capacity that comes with having the same kids all day long, especially at that age. A lot of our schools are moving to 2 teachers or departmentalized.
Right.
And I did that for 2 years in 5th grade then. So I kind of looped up because I had one of the classes and moved to 5th grade for 2 years. And I taught English language arts and social studies for 90 minutes every day to 3 different groups. And I didn't like it as much. And I still stand by that whole self-contained thing. But there are people, it just depends on the person sometimes. Sometimes it's good to have that expert who teaches all of the math. But when it comes to elementary school and the needs of our kids from the emotional standpoint, I really loved being self-contained.
That's interesting because I'm almost the opposite when they get older. I think because
Yeah.
I'm middle school, 6th grade up, I like to have that specialty. But I think the only concern I've always had with self-contained in the elementary is that there's such a focus on reading and writing and math, which is needed without a doubt.
Sure.
Sometimes science and social studies gets pushed to the wayside because it's not a tested area in a lot of
Correct.
grades, so they don't use it. But you had all of them, so you were able to do whatever you wanted. It was great.
Right. Right. And when I'm pulling small groups during math time and somebody's doing great on math and I have 5 more extra minutes, I'm like, hey, like you bombed in reading this morning. Let's take a look at some of these questions. So just having that fluidity and flexibility with a daily schedule worked for me. And it may not work for everybody.
Well, and you really do get to know your kids. That's the biggest
Yeah.
part. You had how many in a class? Probably 22, 23?
I had 29 that year. I walked in on
Oh,
on November 15th. It was the biggest class I ever had. Yeah, I had 29, usually around 24,
oh
between
my
20 and
goodness.
24 is our normal class size. Yeah.
Your first year is like
So
you walked to school uphill both ways, you know?
yeah, I don't know how I survived. I think the biggest thing is I lived in the community, so I felt like I had to stick it out, and then my team really. But yeah.
Wow. Well, I'll share my first year story at another time, but I think when you start off in that kind of situation, it makes the other years feel like, oh, I can do this. It's a lot
Yeah.
easier the second year.
Right. Right. I would say it probably took me 7 years to really feel like I knew what I was doing.
Well, I still don't
So,
know. That's why I do
well, there's
this.
that.
I still fake a lot of what I think I know. So other people think I know stuff. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So you looped up to 5th grade, for lack of a better term. You went up to 5th grade with that group, and then after 5th grade, is that when you started your International Baccalaureate coordinator piece?
Yeah, so my second year in 5th grade, we had a couple schools in our district that already were IB authorized schools or IB candidate schools, so working on the authorization process. And our principal was approached about um, going and finding out about the program. So we flew out to LA. There was a team of about 6 of us and did the introductory IB training, and we came back all excited. We had a coordinator in that position that was from two other schools in the district, so stretched thin, and they were going to be filling the position so that person could stay in those other two schools. So she was really there to just help us along. And my principal said, "Hey, why don't you go for this?" And I did. And I ended up being the coordinator for the school that I taught at for 12 years or 14 years, and then another elementary school in our district at that time.
So, and I'm included in this group. Very few people know a lot about International Baccalaureate unless you are an International Baccalaureate school. You see
Yeah.
it a lot, but what is the program and what are the benefits of having that in your school?
Yeah, so it's a transdisciplinary inquiry-based framework. So the IB really started, and I'm just going to paraphrase this, as a way to um, streamline education across the world. So when people are traveling as part of like government employees types thing, you could go to an IB school, whether it's in the United States or in Germany or somewhere in Africa, and your student we would be getting the same education based on standards. So that was really the beginning of it. It started at the DP level and worked its way down into the elementary schools, and that's where we were. Had two primary years programs. This would have been the third and the fourth at that time. So it is an inquiry-based model. It's transdisciplinary, which means you're connecting content across content areas through conceptual learning. So things like form, like what is something made of? How does it work? Well, that could be numbers and math. That could be characters and reading. It could be a government system, function, responsibility, and really tying in what does this mean to me then as a learner? So action and agency are also really big in an IB education. A lot of self-reflection, a lot of feedback, so a lot of overlap with some of the visible thinking and clarity work that we're talking a lot now about as well. And then just portfolio based. That was another big piece of it back then that has become a little less emphasized at this point, but really kids seeing that journey from starting in the school and then moving through either the elementary, the middle school, or the high school then.
So do you have a population that comes in from various areas? Do you have a transient population that comes in and out that was one of the catalysts for IB or not?
No, honestly, I think it's because Shaker was an IB district, and in
Oh,
Cleveland Heights, we compete with Shaker for schools. I mean, you got to sell yourself and your programming, and that's a valid reason to do it. The principal that I had at Noble for 9 years ended up leaving our district and going to Cleveland Municipal School District to start an IB school there. So I think it was a buzz at the time locally. We don't have a lot of kids moving for the reason that the IB was founded, but we do well, more so at that time, had a lot of refugee
oh,
population.
okay.
And then with the hospitals being right down the road, the southern end of our district, closer to Shaker, we get a lot of doctors and medical staff that will be in the area for residencies and stuff. So they do move in and out occasionally. And oftentimes those students are coming from other countries too.
Interesting. I always
Yeah.
wonder where that international came from. So do you know how many different countries they're in at this point?
Oh my God, I should have looked that up. There's like 1,500 schools
Oh,
across a couple
wow.
hundred countries. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. United States, it's not as prevalent in public schools. It's usually private schools. Beaumont down the road is an
Hmm.
IB school. When we were in Boise last week for our trip, they had a DP, a diploma program, high school down the road that was a private school. So you see it in the private sector a little bit more. St. Ed's has a DP
Hmm.
program.
So you keep
So
saying DP, what's that
I'm
short for?
sorry. DP is the high school program. It's diploma program.
Okay.
So it competes with AP,
Oh, okay.
advanced placement courses.
Hmm.
Not as recognized by colleges for credit, but that
Interesting.
would be what it competes with. Yeah.
Well,
And I don't know a ton about the DP just because we don't have it in Heights.
right. So with all that background of IB, you hit a lot of the same things that are really popular right now in education and trying to move towards, the integrated curriculums and those types of
Yeah.
things. Um, do you see your kids there being able to make those connections? And because you haven't been in other schools, it's sort of hard, but prior to IB, do kids have a hard time making connections between subjects and understanding that they are related, even though we're not teaching them in a related manner?
Yeah, I just think part of it is developmental. Like even thinking about my own kids, and when I started teaching, I didn't have my own children, and then once I don't know if you can speak to this too, but once you have your own children, you start to think about things a little differently. Like, oh, would my kids see it that way? Would they connect with that? So I think part of it's developmental, especially at the middle school level. Um, they're so egocentric, and it's just the way their brain works, and I love the research about how they're just big toddlers because their brains are growing and developing so quickly again, just like at those early stages. That there's more of a need to connect it to them sometimes than to other content areas. So that real life application, like how am I going to use this? Or what does this mean for my local community or a global community? So some of those connections often at the middle school age tend to be more relevant than the transdisciplinary part of it or interdisciplinary, connecting more than one subject. At the elementary level, I think they just want everything to connect. I think that's natural, and they make connections where they aren't there. So sometimes that's fun too, is to help
Right.
them decipher between what really is connected and what isn't.
Well, the creativity in elementary school brains is always phenomenal to me and what they
Yeah.
can come up with. I love that part of the young kids. So I was actually very happy that because we postponed this talk a few times just for scheduling issues, but I was very happy that it's happening after your trip to Boise to actually visit another IB school. So could you tell us a little bit about your trip and why you were going out there?
Yeah. So we actually didn't go out there for IB.
Oh,
Um,
that's right. That's right. It was something different. It was clarity.
yes, it was clarity. So yes, so this past year we have started working with Kara Vandis, who wrote the book Clarity for Learning and a couple other books to complement it. A lot of her work is based off of Hattie's work with visible learning and effect sizes. So, we've done a lot with Hattie. I think every school district has over and
Oh,
over again.
don't assume that.
Yeah.
No,
Don't assume
no, don't assume
that. Oh,
that.
okay.
No,
Okay, then I guess this makes us ahead of the curve, which
you
is
are a
good.
little bit ahead on some of the schools. Yes.
Yeah, so last spring, the district solicited interest in teachers being part of a Clarity cohort. And Kara Vandis has been coming out to our district. She's coming 4 times each for this school year. And the interest in it was so big that we needed to create 2 cohorts. So there's approximately 45 teachers that will be part of this cohort and meet with Kara 4 times a year. We all got the books. All of our building and district coaches are a part of the work to help lead that work. And it has had a lot of overlap with IB, which has been great. So that, we see a lot of conflict sometimes with programming and
Mhm.
initiatives. And this was nice to see a lot of this just connect a lot of that work. So we were invited to, I guess, Boise is Kara has worked with the Boise school district and for 3 years now. And we, that sometimes not sometimes, but statistically, when you initiate something new, it takes about 3 years or at least
Mhm.
3 years to start to see some of that payoff. So Boise invited us with Kara's push nudge to come and visit some of their schools. So I was part of the third group of teachers and administrators and coaches to travel to Boise, which is a long trip. Um, and we spent 3.5 days visiting 10 different schools. So
That's a full day.
they were long, busy days, but it was so invigorating. Like I'm getting choked up thinking about it, just to see the amount of work that has been done in the past 3 years to really make learning clear for students. So we did not see a high school on my trip. I know they went another time, but we saw 2 junior highs and a bunch of elementary schools. And a group of them even went to the CTE program, which was cool to see some of this work in that setting as well. So clarity is all about Hattie's work of making learning
Mhm.
visible for students. So success criteria, learning intentions, feedback, feedback, feedback. And really, it was really cool. I think the biggest takeaway for me was all of the self and peer assessment that came in the learning. They had some schools that were more affluent than others. They had schools where demographics looked like ours with Title I schools. Um, I saw a dual language school, which I had never seen before, which was amazing. They had one school that was more of an IB school than any school I've been in. They had families that spoke over 10 different languages, and they had liaison students and adults to support that, and really embraced culture and community. But it was amazing.
That's
Still
so much
processing.
fun. It's I'm sure you are because that's overload if you're visiting that many schools with similar but different approaches. I mean,
Yeah.
it is overwhelming, and I'm sure the processing each night was just, oh my gosh, you couldn't stop talking about it if you're out to dinner, I'm sure.
No, I didn't sleep well the first night. The other two nights I was dead because I was just, and the way I said it is, this is how we want our students to leave learning. Like I was so exhausted from my learning. Like I did the load. And thinking about that's how we want our kids to leave. We want them to leave more exhausted than we are. And does
Exactly.
that actually happen?
Right,
It happened for
exactly.
me as a student there.
Well, I've actually been doing a lot of work with clarity myself, and so much so I know that on Hattie's scale it's a 0.75. So that
Yeah,
if anybody's
it's
out
up there
there,
with teacher efficacy.
it really is. And part of what you're doing hits the top end of the scale with the collective teacher efficacy of 1.57, because that is what you're trying to do is trying to get everybody on the same page and
Yeah,
really believing that students can learn. And that's really hard to do as a district, especially a district your size.
yeah. Oh, Boise's huge.
Yeah, Boise's huge. And it's
Huge.
beautiful. It's
It
absolutely
is.
gorgeous.
I did not expect the mountains. I saw the mountains. I'm like, oh, like
Yeah.
expect potatoes. Stereotypes.
Yes. Well, yeah, that's our Midwestern view of it. But I have to tell you, I went up to Idaho one time when we lived in Utah and we got stuck on the freeway because of the elk migration. So you still have those things that stereotypes. Yeah, you're out there. You're out
That's
in the
really
middle of
cool
nowhere.
though.
It was very cool. So the work that you're doing for Clarity, what was the major takeaway that you took and what you're going to bring back to Cleveland Heights University Heights?
I really think the first step is the learning intentions and the success criteria. So, rewinding back to when I was in the classroom, your administrator is always like, you need to post your standards and your I can statements. And like, okay, like I'm being told to do it, it's on my board. But really, like, are kids reading it? Are they interact? But did I ever put them in a position where that was part of the learning? So thinking about these things, these practices that sometimes are pushed upon us, but really like putting that kid hat on. Well, why do I have to do that? Or what's the importance of that? So really thinking through that if they know how to be successful, they're more apt to be successful.
Right.
And that was really the biggest takeaway. And then how do I know I'm successful? And how am I going to learn? Like, why do I need to know this? How am I going to learn it? Why do I need to know it? And how do I know it?
Right. Those are all, and I'm starting to tie things together. Is she the one that has the Clarity workbook, playbook?
Yes. Yes.
That's the one I've been recommending for the last 3 years to people. As soon as it came out, I found it, and everybody that I've recommended it to just loves the step-by-step modules that are given to be able to
Yeah.
figure out how to be clear. And I
Yes.
have the second one with success criteria. I haven't gotten through that one as quickly just because I'm so stuck on the clarity piece. It's so good. It's so, so
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. They live in my car because I'm in 3 buildings in the district. So my books live in my car because if I leave them somewhere, I need them and I don't have them. So
Mine's
yeah.
sitting right over there because I use it so much. It's in my pile of books I take with me anytime I
Yeah.
go anywhere. But I love the part of that where when you're breaking down a standard and you're just pulling out nouns and verbs to get the skills and concepts, to me, that is so simplistic. And every time I've presented that piece to a group of teachers, they're like, where was this, 10 years ago? This makes it easy.
Yeah. And then it was that co-creation piece that was missing. And that was a huge misconception for me is that co-created means we're sitting down as a class and the kids are going to tell me what they think should be included. And while that can be part of it, in her work, co-created means they understand it. So you might be coming up with the success criteria, but the co-creation is the understanding. And that really was the piece for me missing in the classroom all those years ago. So I can
Yeah.
put it up on the board, but if you're not a part of that work, it doesn't mean anything to you.
Right. And I do like the fact that it's the I will learn and the I can statements are separated. The problem that I'm seeing with teachers, and this just might be for future reference with you, they often can confuse that with the learning outcomes and the
Yeah.
language of how everything should come together. So I think that that book in their hands definitely helps because there has been so many other ways of looking at this. People get
Mm-hmm.
confused and they want to use the old skill with the new approach, and that's
Right.
hard.
Right.
Y-
Yeah. And I think that one of the things Boise has done really well is that this is their only focus. So they have made their initiative clear too. Um, and that's where all their support comes in through that clarity lens.
that is another piece that I think schools really have to focus on is you have to find one thing and just do it really, really well.
Yeah.
And there's some books out there that I've been privy to through my wife, who's recommended some, but some business books. But your wig or your one thing, whatever that thing is, it should be solid enough that it makes all the other issues handled through that one thing, or it goes away because it's not that important.
Yeah. And I think clarity is that wraparound.
hmm it
Yeah.
is. If you're clear, like you said, feedback is in there,
Mm-hmm.
communication is in there, collective teacher efficacy is in there. There's so many things that it brings to the table that it really does drive a school, or it can drive a school.
Yeah, even down to like that she refers to the learner disposition, in which we have in international baccalaureate schools, we call it the learner profile, but it's
hmm
10 attributes of a good learner. So all of these schools created their own learner disposition, so their attitudes or attributes that define a learner. And that was the other piece of language is what's the difference between a learner and a student. And I thought that was powerful too.
Right. I
So,
love that.
yeah.
I like saying, asking a kid why are they here, and the reason is to learn, and it could be
Yeah.
learning anything. It doesn't have to be a subject. I'm just here to learn. And the same thing. What do you teach? I teach kids. I teach kids how to learn.
Yeah.
If that's the ultimate goal, I think that is a very solid starting point for a lot of teachers to come together.
Yeah.
It's hard to
And
argue that.
some it is hard to argue that. And sometimes the learning is what not to do too. Like
I,
we've done a lot of that as well.
Oh yes, yes, very much so. And I think that's where I have job security because a lot of old practices still happen. And
Yeah.
there are some, old practices that are very, very, very effective according to Hattie's research. But there's
Hmm.
others that that's really not needed anymore. It's
Yeah.
a little different. So how does in your district and in Boise in the elementary schools, are they standards based or are they traditional grading?
I didn't ask that in Boise. That's a great question. So I'm glad I have all the learning coaches' emails. But in our district, we still do, there are standards listed on our report cards, but they're not graded. So I feel like we're moving in that direction. But I feel like we've been moving in that direction since pre-COVID. We have some teachers, we also aren't consistent with how we grade. So that's another thing. Um, but we do have some teachers that do standards-based grading and mastery grading using 4-point rubrics, but we still do the ABCD. And then their standards on our elementary report cards are, some of them are there. Some of them are combined and condensed for comments. So, the X, I haven't taught this, or
hmm
I don't even know if we use the 1, 2, 3. I'm sorry, it's been so long since I've done report cards. But the one thing I will say is I showed the report card to my husband, and it's not parent friendly.
No.
Like the report card made sense to me because I'm an educator and I understand this. He's like, I don't know what any of this means. So I think that could become part of our clarity work too, though. So if we're making these standards make sense for students, how do we then make sense for our families as well?
That is a big part of the clarity piece. I think the communication and how you can basically market this whole switch if you're going to standards-based grading
Sure.
is a parent thing because that's not how I was taught. I hear that a
Right.
lot. And so they don't understand it, nor should they. We shouldn't expect them to just get it. But I think what you were describing with what you saw in Boise and the IB program, standards-based grading, I think would fit in perfectly for
Absolutely.
those types of things. And that is always the issue. How do I move from the letter grade to this? Or if I'm still
Hmm.
required to give a letter grade, why would I ever do standards based if I have to still
Correct.
give a letter grade? But there are ways. And just as a resource, the Diocese of Cleveland, all their K4 now is standards based, and they have a scale and they did priority standards and they laid
Oh,
it all
wow.
out. Yeah, so I'll be happy to share some of their work, but they've
Yeah.
done a pretty nice job. And their scale is a 4-point scale, but it's not based on Hattie, or I'm sorry, not based
Hmm.
on Webb's depth of knowledge. It's based on their own scale, but they give performance indicators for each one of them.
Okay.
So it's pretty intense work that they've done, and they're rolling out year by year. So this is their
Hmm.
fourth year of doing it. So kindergarten and first graders, they're all in. They've been doing it for years, but the other ones are still trying to learn the process. It's an interesting model.
But I think that's a great way to push the shift is through a spiral like that too.
Hmm.
Because
Without a doubt.
if you try and do it all at once, it's not going to be done well.
No,
So,
no. And even though it's been done well, there are still, factors that come in because you're
yeah,
hiring new teachers all the time,
yeah.
especially in private schools. They have a high turnover rate. So every year you have first and second grade teachers that have no clue what they're doing in
Hmm.
standards-based grading because they didn't do it in their other district or they've
Yeah,
never even heard it before. So it's a constant training cycle for them at all grades.
yeah.
So that's interesting. You brought up a name earlier with Diane Sweeney. What's the work you're doing with Diane?
So Diane Sweeney is another consultant that the district is working with right now. For a couple years, 8 or 9 years now, we've been doing some coaching work, and a lot of the earlier stuff was based on Jim Knight's work, so instructional coaching, which was
Hmm.
really focused on the teacher. And then with this clarity work coming through, we've switched to looking more into Diane Sweeney's work, which is student-centered coaching. So it's really looking at it through the lens of the learner. So in the past, the coach was kind of the expert for the instruction and the instructional practices and the
Hmm.
assessment process. The Diane Sweeney model is really student centered. So it's based on data. That was another word I never heard in Boise. Everything was student evidence, and I loved that.
Hmm.
I know they mean the same thing, but sometimes words matter.
It does matter.
So it does matter. So the coaching model, the student centered coaching model, really starts with the data. So where are kids and what do they need? And then it's looking at how the classroom teacher and the learning coach can partner then to work on whatever that skill set is or that standard is and move students. So we're still in the infancy of it. She has been coming a couple times a year. We have a coaching team in the district. That's another one of my hats I wear. So in two of our elementary schools, I am the learning coach. And it's been fun. And I'm going to say to try that because we're still learning that process. But
Hmm.
it's been a great experience.
That's another thing that I've been working on with the school is the personalized learning approach. And actually,
Hmm.
I have that book sitting right next to me. I'm sure you may have seen this one before.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a book study I'm doing with their BLTs, and
Okay.
that's going to turn into a bigger thing down the road. But it really is the according to data the way to teach. And when we're looking at traditional methods, the student was never really the focus in our old school teaching methods. It was always, hey, I'm the important one in the room, and you
Yeah.
still are, but it's in a very different role. And I think that's
Right.
the hardest part for people to get used to. What are you finding in when and again, I know you're in the infancy stages, but what is the benefit for the teacher in going to this personalized approach?
So I'll speak to a second grade classroom I was in for the last coaching cycle I did. Our We were focusing on math. We have a new math curriculum this year, an instructional resource. So we are using Into Math, and I went in to work on some number sense. And our focus was really on how to help the kids use manipulatives and pictures to understand mathematical processes. And she had 4 or 6 kids in her room. 2 were EL students, 2 were special ed, and 2 just really low with the data coming in on the pre-assessment. So my focus in the room was to focus on those 6 kids. So she would do most of the instruction. I would float the room, and then when it was time to move into small group or independent work, we could then identify much easier with an extra adult in the room who needed extra support. So then I would pull kids. So it was really this in the moment formative data driving how then the students were grouped. Can you do that on your own? Sure. Is it easier when you have somebody else? Absolutely. And then we would plan together once a week was our goal. It didn't always work that way. Emails and stuff always worked too. But it was nice to see then those kids support each other. And then they were disappointed when they didn't get called into the group rather than that stigma as I'm getting called into a group because
Right.
I don't know what I'm doing. Kids very fluidly moved in and out. Like the one day I pulled 6 kids back, and 2 of them within 2 problems of adjustment figured it out. So sometimes it just takes a little longer for the light bulb.
Hmm.
Um, some of them, one, it was really the language barrier. She was very smart with the math, but just needed more time because of the language barrier. So with an extra person, that works. But then to be able to sit down after those quick little formative checks and to see that needle moving was really great. What we learned in the moment too is that moving from one resource to another, there were some real holes we didn't anticipate.
Hmm.
So just having somebody else to talk through that with, I think, is really helpful as well.
Yeah, if you can collaborate with anybody and it's a true collaboration, having that extra voice there, there are things that you don't think of just because you are in your own little head of your thought process. It's good to have that other voice there.
Yeah. And even
It's
when she has another second grade teacher on her team, but things don't always look the same or feel the same or come out the same from classroom to classroom. So when both people are in the same room and can see through that same lens, it's very helpful.
well, and like you said, it's real time information that you're dealing with, and it's in the moment you both see that same thing. It's very easy to relate to each other and see what needs to be done next. It's perfect. Um, I love that answer, by the way. All the things that another Hattie scaffolding, you're scaffolding those kids to get them
Sure.
ready for whatever that skill is. So again, all this comes back to data and research and the student evidence piece. I love.
Yeah.
That's something else that I've been messing around with in my teaching and in schools is what is true mastery and what does that look like? And I wish I had to find it again. I found it in a book, but there's 3 different things that I try to do now. I still have the traditional testing assessments of some sort. Then I have my observational work that I now record rather than participation. It's are they showing me knowledge of this topic at a level that I expect? And then the last one is that student generated evidence. So
Yeah.
it's all about what can you produce without me telling you that shows me you learned this thing.
Right.
And kids have a hard time with that at first, but then once they start catching on what they can do to be student generated, the options are unlimited and are things that I
Yeah.
would never assign because of I thought it would be too much or I didn't have the time for it. But if they say this is what I want to do and they do it, it's amazing what I'm getting and it's fun to see.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
student generated.
Yeah, student generated. And the master thing for me is tricky. And I feel like this has come more from the mom side of things with both of my kids being very into their sports right now and the coaching being different than when they were little and just, doing things to figure things out. But Maddie's coach said to her the one day, Maddie is 15 and rides horses. What if you haven't reached your goal because you keep raising the bar? And that stuck with me from a classroom standpoint too. So we may set the bar here for kids, and that might be there. So there's growth versus achievement. We know that
Hmm.
too. But if the mastery for this kid is that moment, but like we keep just pushing it a little at a time and never throw it out of reach for that child, I think that's different too. So could those all potentially be mastery moments?
Hmm.
Like, are you put as long as they're in a position where they're pushing themselves? To me, there's some mastery there.
I totally agree with that. And I do put somewhat of a level using, again, Webb's different levels that
Mm-hmm.
if I say I want them at a level 3 for this and have, you had to show me strategic thinking, they can get there, but sometimes I'll see level 4 just because that's where the kid wants to go.
Right.
So to set that limit based on what the standard's looking for and what I'm looking for through that standard, I can set what I feel is what's expected by the curriculum and
Mm-hmm.
then let the kids choose to go higher if they want to, which you again, mastery is mastery in my opinion, and the improvement's always going to be there if they're truly being pushed. And I think
Yeah.
that's what data is going to tell us. Did
Yeah.
we grow them, which I feel is far more important than the achievement piece. Are we growing kids?
Yeah. Over a decade ago when I was in that fourth grade classroom, I co-taught with special ed. And at that time, there was a lot of pull out to resource rooms. And that still does happen in places, but because of the relationship I had with this teacher, we did a lot of co-teaching. And I have never seen growth from special ed kids like that when they are put in a room surrounded by average peers, above average peers who don't have those learning deficits, they rose to the occasion and they had this great support community around them. Like the special ed teacher and I weren't the only teachers in the room. They were learning from each other. And, some of them, it was dyslexia. Some of them were just low IQ. And there were lots of different ways to look at it, but every single one of those kids had growth. And to me, in that moment, that was mastery, because it wasn't just the academics. It was that mindset of I am here and I can do this. I'm not being pulled out to somewhere else.
Yeah, I am again in full agreement with you because I've always taught in a fully inclusive classroom, and the benefits of that are amazing. They are
Yeah,
learning from each other far more than we give them credit for, I think. And
right.
that's why I think that observational piece in that mastery triad that I do is so important, because I could walk into a discussion and have two kids talking about the topic at such a level that I'm like, whoa. But then they can't test well in that because, their writing ability or whatever it may be. But now I have proof that this kid understands what I'm trying to teach, which is
Yeah,
awesome. It's just so much fun to see that.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
our time is almost up, Leslie. It's
I know.
crazy.
It went
It,
fast. I was nervous too. I don't know why, but this was great.
I love talking about this in next season because I'm already thinking about next season. We're going to talk about specific topics, so get your thinking cap on what you might want
Okay.
to talk. We could continue with IB or how the clarity piece is going for you because that is a
Yeah.
big piece.
Or even the
I'm
coaching
interested.
piece. Yeah.
Yes, without a doubt. I think the clarity piece is becoming, we actually focused on it in Twinsburg for 2 years.
Okay.
Then the pandemic hit, so the focus was sort of changed,
Yeah.
but it
I
really
know.
was.
And I still feel like we're feeling the effects of that, and it's crazy.
Yes, we are without a doubt. And I think the hardest part is the mindset of, do I have to be in the building or not? That's the
Yes.
hardest part, not just for teachers, but for the kids too. It's a all-encompassing thing. So
Yeah.
before I go, what is next for Leslie in her educational pathway?
Oh my God.
Ooh,
I
ooh.
don't know. I'm going to admit this. I said to a colleague the other day, I said, I'm feeling burned out. And I don't know if it's just because I wear a lot of hats. But that's a great question that I don't know that I have the answer for. I love all this work. I love the district I work in. I've been here 24 years and I'm not leaving education. I'm not saying that, but I just feel like I'm at a point where I need to pick something specific for my growth as an educator. And with all the opportunities I have in the position I'm in, I don't know what I want that focus to be for me. I'm excited and actually anxious now to continue the clarity work, just coming off of that Boise trip. I love the connections they made for us between that and the student-centered coaching. So we'll see. We'll see. But I'm at this point where I just want to know it all, but then I also need to pick a focus.
You'll never know it all, so let's put that to the side. But if you said it earlier on that you almost got emotional just reminding yourself of what you saw in Boise. So I think that is probably where you should be headed. If that still makes you that emotional after a week of being away and
Yeah.
to
To
gather
Boise physically or to Boise,
no,
Florida?
the ideas of Boise. I don't want to break in a new neighbor.
Yeah, no, that's tough. Tough. We've done
And
it twice.
your kids still have a school to do, so you don't want to move
Yeah.
mid-year or
No,
mid-career. So, but start
no,
looking at that piece because if it makes you emotional, then it's touching something that you really are focused on.
it does. And it was the kids. It was the work from the kids. And granted, they got there because of adults and that shift in mindset, but just to see that shift in mindset in students was amazing.
Yeah, I think once you have time, you're going to say, "This is what I can throw all my eggs into this basket and make it happen here at Cleveland Heights University Heights."
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. It's great work and I'd love to see it come through here too.
Well, and don't take any career advice from me. I can't hold a job.
You have
So
your dream job now.
I do have my dream job. This has been a very pleasant transition for me. So I have to say, yes, this is a good one. Well, thank you for a great
Thank
conversation today.
you.
If you have any questions for myself or Leslie, for those that are watching, you can contact me at norm@normpotter.com or visit my website, structuredcreativityconsulting.com. And if you have any questions for Leslie specifically about clarity, IB, any of the things that we talked about today, please reach out to me and I can put you in touch with Leslie. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think we're all open that. I think all educators help educators. So until the next week, be kind, be professional, and find solutions. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.